Major funding for Frontline is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Additional funding is provided by this station and other public television stations nationwide.
Tonight on Frontline, a seldom told story behind the Japanese industrial miracle. A tale of America, Japan, automobiles, and the workers who make them.
I believe it's going to be the best place I've ever worked.
A journey from Tennessee to Tokyo. A different meaning for the slogan, "We are driven."
From the network of public television stations, a presentation of KCTS Seattle, WNET New York, WPBT Miami, WTVS Detroit, and WGBH Boston. This is Frontline.
Good evening, I'm Judy Woodruff. Tonight, a different story about the miracle of the Japanese automobile industry. A story of unions that agree with management, of rigid control and little room for dissent. We begin in Tennessee, where Nissan, the world's fourth largest automaker, is opening a new plant. A film crew recorded that event and also followed a group of American workers from Tennessee to Tokyo to watch them train on Nissan's home turf. Those American workers were impressed with what they saw, but their tour was carefully arranged. Some of what they saw and some of what they did not see is our story tonight. Part of the story was not easy to film. Our producers had to arrange secret meetings with a small handful of Japanese workers who were willing to break ranks with their company and their union. What we see tonight is not the full story of Japanese labor relations, but it does offer some other images of modern industrial Japan.
I want to welcome all of you to this very special occasion, the dedication of the new Tennessee facility of Nissan Motor Manufacturing Corporation, USA.
Let us pray for the partnership between management and employees. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Nissan Motor Manufacturing Corporation, USA Parade of Trucks.
This was a great day for the Japanese auto giant Nissan. Managers and employees were celebrating a new kind of partnership. This is not a story about how Nissan makes its trucks or builds its factories. It's the story of how Nissan set out to create a new kind of workforce with a new brand of enthusiasm. Under Nissan management, the American worker would learn to love the company, care for the product, and last, but by no means least, join no union. If this Japanese experiment works, Nissan could be creating a new model for labor relations in the USA. But for all the American fanfare, Nissan has its critics at home in Japan. Outside Nissan's Tokyo headquarters, a line of security guards bars the way to demonstrators. In this film on Frontline tonight, we'll be hearing from those who say there's another side to the Nissan success story. All the critics are Japanese. Most work for Nissan.
Without a union in Tennessee, management will dictate working conditions. They'll put the squeeze on wages and living standards. Life there is going to be very hard.
Our basic pay is very low. We can't make ends meet without working overtime, night shift, and holidays. The hours of work are very long. We are not free to take vacations, and the work is hazardous.
The rest of the world has marveled at the rate of Japan's industrial growth, but few have wondered about the human cost. Satoshi Kamata is a prominent writer and journalist who specializes in the auto industry. He even once took a job as an assembly worker for Toyota and wrote a book about the experience called Factory of Despair. Since then, he's written, industry conditions have been worsening in some ways.
Before the oil crisis, many auto workers quit and returned to the country because the work was so hard. Now very few quit because the recession has gotten worse and workers will stand for anything. In America, the Japanese are putting their plants in the countryside or where people need jobs and will put up with a lot.
50 years ago, Nissan made its first car and called it Datsun, which in Japanese means rabbit. But back then, Nissan cars were about as familiar to most Americans as the Japanese tea ceremony. By 1948, the Japanese newsreels were reporting on Nissan's first foreign sales. One of the earliest customers was an enterprising Egyptian. But Nissan still had a long way to go. The turning point came in 1953. In the immediate post-war years, Japan had one of the worst strike records in the world. Nissan's workers belonged to a militant trade union. In 1953, there was a showdown after Nissan imposed pay cuts on the union's leadership. Nissan followed this with a lockout and surrounded its plant with barricades. It also hired bands of strong-armed men to stop the workers from trying to get back in. The dispute lasted 4 months. Unlike its workers, Nissan could afford to sit it out. The company was being backed by the Japan Industrial Bank, one of the wealthiest in the land. This enabled Nissan to keep its production lines shut down, while more and more workers called for a return to work. When a breakaway union began to form, Nissan seized its chance. Each worker who joined the new union received back pay from Nissan. The bank's support had proved decisive. On a bitter day, the strikers returned to work. Nissan had achieved its aim. It had broken the power of the militant union. But as they streamed back into the factory, thousands wore headbands, a sign of protest in Japan. As work resumed, the newsreels called it the end of an historic confrontation between labor and capital. It was indeed a turning point for Nissan and the end of an era for its workers. Nissan now had a company union it could live with. Indeed, the breakaway union's leadership came from Nissan's own accounting department. Its founding slogan was, "Those who truly love their union, love their company." This kind of cooperation has become standard practice throughout Japanese industry. Foreigners sometimes see this as evidence that the Japanese are literally a race apart. This view is disputed by a professor at Tokyo University who has written a history of the 1953 strike. He's Ichiro Saga.
There is no denying that in Japan, labor and management cooperate closely. But it wasn't always so. In the early post-war years, there were trade unions that put the interests of the workers first. It was only after these unions were crushed that today's collaborative system of labor relations came about. It is definitely not a peculiar product of Japan's culture.
Today, Nissan is a world empire. 30 years after its showdown with a militant union, world sales total $17 billion a year. Nissan managers are brilliant at opening up new foreign markets. In the words of their own TV ad, they are driven. This was how Nissan found a market for its small Datsun pickup truck in the USA. No wonder Nissan's president, Takashi Ishihara, thinks it can take on all comers.
Even if GM, Ford, and Chrysler build their own small pickup trucks, we feel that the American car-buying public recognizes that this market really belongs to the Japanese. We are confident that we will be able to compete with the Americans.
By the mid-70s, this Japanese drive into the American market was meeting resistance in Detroit and Washington. As protectionist pressure mounted, Nissan decided to build itself a truck assembly plant in the sleepy Tennessee town of Smyrna.
Top story. Groundbreaking ceremonies marking the official arrival of Nissan Motor Company will take place today just outside Smyrna, Tennessee. Expected on
ceremonies for the $660 million Nissan Motor manufacturing plant will take place today in Smyrna, Tennessee.
Nissan made its own documentary about this, the largest single Japanese investment in America.
February 3rd, 1981. A host of dignitaries and officials converge on the frozen Tennessee countryside just 15 miles south of Nashville. On this bright February morning, what so many had worked for, what so many had hoped for, had indeed happened. Nissan had come to America. Nissan had come to Tennessee.
This company will be doing is putting 2,200 jobs in Tennessee for 2,200 Tennesseans at an average of $20,000 a job.
And we believe that Tennesseans have the desire and the dedication to manufacture the best truck made anywhere in the world.
But the local news had a different story.
From the beginning of today's ceremony, Southern hospitality was hard to find. Officials tried to carry on, but they were constantly met with chants of "Go home, Jack," "Remember Pearl Harbor," and "Go home, Rat." It was a situation often laced with great irony.
Thank you all for your support, your hospitality, and your personal warmth.
While some stuck to the script, others improvised bravely.
Terminology "boo" in Japanese means welcome. Thank you very much.
Nissan had hired a non-union contractor to build the plant. And Nissan was determined to keep unions out of the finished plant. But angry construction workers brought the groundbreaking ceremony to a halt. The UAW itself played no part in this demonstration. The union was taking a long-term view, as was former President Doug Frazier.
Well, the Nissan people in Smyrna, Tennessee, and this is a policy that was dictated in Japan, and they're bound and determined that we will be unable to organize that facility. And I don't get that excited about it because I'm old enough to remember when General Motors and Ford and Chrysler said, never, never will the UAW be able to organize us. In fact, it took us a few years longer in Ford than it did in General Motors and Chrysler because Henry Ford was a very, very determined man.
But behind the warning notices and the chain-link fence, Nissan was equally determined. The new factory began to take shape, and with it, a new approach to management. Though the managers were almost all Americans, their style had a distinctly Japanese tone. Starting with morning exercises, Japanese stressed teamwork, harmony, and togetherness. Nissan Vice President Shuichi Yoshida.
The Japanese management is more human-oriented. The group consciousness, teamwork-oriented. We are thinking that the important asset to the company is human being, not machines.
To keep the humans happy and the unions out, Nissan had appointed a tough and experienced former Ford executive to head up its Smyrna operation. Given Nissan's emphasis on harmony, Marvin Runyon seemed a surprising choice as president.
What are we doing here today? Well, what does this robot do for us?
In newspaper interviews, Runyon has admitted that during his time at Ford, he treated his workers in the autocratic manner of so many American managers. Now a born-again Nissan man, he's adopted a folksy style and hopes to put the days of shop floor confrontation far behind him.
In a lot of American industry, you have pretty much of an adversary relationship between workers and management, which is developed over a large number of years. It's not something that just happened. It's a large number of years this is developed. And that's true in a lot of industry, not only automobile industry. And what we're trying to do here is to not have that.
Nissan could have the kind of workforce it wanted. Though it was starting from scratch, unemployment was high in Tennessee, and some 130,000 people applied for 2,000 jobs. The man in charge of selecting and training them was Larry Seltz.
In our selection, we're looking for people who will work in a team atmosphere. We look at their ability to do the job, the technical skills, and we also look at their ability to work in a team kind of an atmosphere in cooperation.
One of those with the right job skills and team spirit was Geraldine Hyatt.
They believe in hiring the right people in the first place. That way you don't have to lose anybody. They interview and interview and interview and make sure of people's background.
Though he left a good job and even took a pay cut to join Nissan, Ed Thornton's background was thoroughly screened.
Most of the people that they have hired, of course, they do talk to us within the legal limits of the law about our feelings on the union. Of course, you're free to tell them what you think, whether yay or nay. I feel like they were looking at your opinion before they hired you as to what you think about the union.
I really don't see a need for a union in the environment that we're going to have.
So if everyone's told the truth, the union really doesn't stand a very good chance of getting in.
It's sort of like having a family counselor if the family's getting along. There's just, there's no room for it.
We have said that we don't need any third parties of any kind.
Without a union, there's one party, not three, just one. Because the worker in Smyrna, Tennessee will have nothing to say about what his wages are and what his fringe benefits are and indeed what most of his working conditions are. So what you have is a one-party system, and what we want to do is inject another party to make it a two-party system, which is always more democratic.
We are have all the benefits and wages, etc., equivalent, if not better, than the automotive industry. When we get around to our bonuses for productivity and things like that, we might pay better than the existing automotive wages. So I don't think there's any reason for any third parties at all.
The reason for Nissan's anti-union stance in Tennessee may be that here in Japan it has a kind of union it could find nowhere else. This is Ichiro Shioji, president of the Nissan Union. Nissan's company chairman has said he's a man who sees things mainly from management's point of view. His view of labor relations is such that he's even been called Nissan's second president.
I think that the American management should think how to create a cooperative relationship with trade unions instead of confrontation with them. Also, trade unions should have more concern about productivity and quality of the goods.
Nissan and Shioji's union collaborate to an extraordinary degree. Union officials like these are favored for promotion to company foreman. Nissan commonly assigns junior managers to a period of service in the union. Few rank-and-file workers dare to speak out openly against a system in which their own union boss is so close to management. One exception is a Nissan diesel employee called Masao Kayama.
Candidates for union elections are chosen by a committee. Former union officers, who are now company supervisors, are part of this committee, even though that's not what's written in the bylaws. This is where the company and the union decide who should run for office. Most of the people who hold positions in the union are company supervisors. For example, the shop steward, the lowest position in the union, is usually a company sub-foreman, and the shop delegate is usually a foreman. The union and management are so intermeshed that it's impossible for just any worker to become a union officer.
Back in the USA, Nissan had a different way to create a cooperative workforce. And it was spending $63 million on training and motivating its non-union workers.
That's something that I admire about Nissan, is taking the time to train us before they stick us on a job.
Everyone's going to get equal training. They're not going to put anybody in the plant that hadn't been trained and knows his job.
If my machine breaks down, there's other things in the shop that I'll be capable of doing. I'll know everything in my department, which is good for me and good for Nissan.
John, make sure your listing wires are up in position now. You're under the hook good at the rear. Go, working left, right to left.
It was clear that for the first time in their work lives, many felt they were being treated like people.
Well, first, I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight. We're here to welcome 35 new production technicians and their families to our growing Nissan family.
Family was a word that Runyon used often. And if Nissan could be likened to a family, then he was its father figure. Nissan believes that a happy family is a productive family.
As our guests of honor tonight.
Our first pair for role-playing today, then, will be Ron and Marvin. Why don't you all come on up front, and Ron, you get us started.
This family atmosphere was rehearsed by middle managers and supervisors in role-playing sessions like this one.
I'm going to be the supervisor this morning, and Marvin is about to go to his workstation and start to work, and I'm going to stop him on the way and talk to him about the quality of the work that he's been doing over the last few weeks. Good morning, Marvin.
Morning, Ron.
How you doing?
Fine. You all right this morning?
Good. Marvin, just want to stop and talk to you a little bit before we started work this morning. I was going over the quality reports for the last couple of weeks, and I've noticed that you have done a consistent job of quality of the parts.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you.
Good. And I wanted to thank you for the work that you've done.
Well, I appreciate that, Ron. I appreciate you noticing the work that I've been doing. But I do try to do a real good job while I'm here, and I hope to improve.
That's very good, Marvin. Once again, I would like to thank you for the hard work that you've done and the consistent quality that you have produced.
Thank you, Ron.
See you later.
Nissan really makes you feel like you're part of the company.
By being proud to be a part of it, we're gonna naturally put forth more effort.
I believe it's going to be the best place I've ever worked.
After we get about 15 people that are new, we like to have lunch with them.
In all its essentials, Runyon's management theory was based on established Japanese practice. But in some ways, Runyon was going further. Here in Smyrna, he was creating an unprecedented combination of Japanese paternalism and Southern hospitality. The atmosphere in Nissan's Japanese factories is very different. Behind the paternalism is a system that has been compared to that of a military hierarchy. In public, Nissan's executives like President Takashi Ishihara pay tribute to the partnership of managers and workers. But there's no doubt at all who is really in command. It's a highly regimented system, and the workers know their place.
Japanese management has quite a good reputation in the United States, but it is a family-style, feudalistic system. It assumes children will obey their parents without question, and workers will obey their bosses. It's a traditional Japanese hierarchy that demands obedience. It is authoritarian. There is a clear chain of command. This side of things is deliberately downplayed. It's a serious problem that only the good side is advertised while the dark side is completely ignored.
Nissan. 1, 2, 3, 4.
In Tennessee, the Americans were trying to give the Nissan philosophy a twist of their own.
1, 2, 3, 4.
For example, they now played American, not Japanese music at their morning exercises.
There's a high expectation of this being a Japanese company. We've got to continue, and in my opinion, to work on the philosophy that this is really a U.S. company.
The Americans were soon to experience the Japanese way of work for themselves. 383 were to go to Japan for on-the-job training.
We're all trying to learn Japanese, and he's our best student so far.
Bring me some more Japanese words home when y'all come back from Japan.
I'll bring you a whole box of Japanese words home. How about that?
Those who flew from nearby Nashville Airport were mostly shop floor supervisors, the future backbone of the company.
Proceed to the gate area for check-in.
They're sending us to Japan not only for the training. I believe that a majority of the training we could actually receive here in the United States. It's to make us to feel more part of the actual Japanese Nissan manufacturing company in Japan, and to us to bring back the feeling or closeness to the other American employees that are employed later by Nissan that we will actually train when we come back and when we hire new employees this spring.
This is the world the Americans would be entering. It's a world of hard work and loyalty to the company that's admired everywhere. But there are critics inside Japan itself. They say that this well-publicized enthusiasm is not spontaneous, but coerced. These critics point to the famous quality control circles. In these, workers suggest how to make themselves more productive. But though quality control circles take place in the workers' spare time, they're not entirely voluntary. Nissan sets a monthly quota of ideas for its workers. Workers must impress the foreman with their loyalty, say the critics. That's why they do morning exercises, come to work early, and do unpaid work in their spare time. The foreman helps determine the workers' wages, and they don't always get equal pay for equal work. The loyalty they show is a factor in how much they earn. Nissan does meet many of its workers' needs. The company provides inexpensive bachelor quarters for its single men. Nissan will even sometimes provide help in finding a wife. The married man's family can feel secure in its subsidized Nissan housing because the company guarantees a job for life. But critics say the price of all this is a kind of dependency. A worker must even show loyalty off the job. It sometimes seems that every Nissan worker drives a Nissan car. In fact, those who drive non-Nissan cars are not allowed to park in the factory lot. Outwardly, the Japanese seem content with the Nissan family way of life. Undoubtedly, they do value the security of their jobs. But with so much at stake, only a handful are willing to criticize the company in public. Because so few Nissan workers will speak out, stories of dissent are hard to bring to light. The man Professor Saga is meeting is a dissident worker at a Nissan factory. He asked that his identity not be revealed. This anonymous worker tells of bad working conditions and how an underground newspaper circulates at his factory. Saga sees this as evidence of discontent. He says this is not an isolated case, and he insists that all his sources are ordinary workers.
The workers I interviewed had no particular ideology. They weren't involved in organizing either. They were ordinary workers living normal lives.
Professor Saga has taped scores of interviews with other workers. For 8 years, he's been working on a special study of labor relations inside Nissan. It's Saga's contention that Nissan workers put on their show of loyalty for fear of retaliation.
Those workers who fail to show enough loyalty in the eyes of the company don't get a square deal. They have no hope of promotion in the company, and they get less pay.
Saga has found few workers who will criticize Nissan in public. But the professor did find some who were prepared to speak out at a factory in North Tokyo that had been taken over by Nissan. These men are the remnants of the All-Metal Workers Union, who refused to join Nissan's union when their old company was acquired.
We don't like to badmouth the Nissan union, but the way we see it, we'd like to see them work harder to improve working conditions.
Nissan operates with a system of mandatory overtime. At the end of every 8-hour day, we must work an hour overtime.
10 minutes before work starts, gongs and klaxons sound in Nissan factories. The workers must lay out tools and spare parts in their own time because the company has pared its workforce to the absolute minimum.
We have really begun to feel the effects of the cutbacks. In my shop, the supervisors have to work on the line these days. Even union officers have to do their stint.
Nissan has virtually eliminated relief workers, so people are discouraged from taking sick leave or full vacations, and the rate of work is being stepped up all the time.
They put a more efficient transfer machine on my job. It didn't change the actual work that I do, but what I used to do in 23 seconds, I now have to do in 15 seconds. It's getting hard to keep up.
Nissan analyzes work, breaking each job down into split seconds. The effect is to eliminate even the shortest pause for breath. The aim is to waste not one motion in the 9-hour day.
Yes, the speed up of work is something else. For example, now if you drop a bolt, you no longer have the time to pick it up.
In 10 years, worker productivity has increased by 70%. But industrial robots have brought no relief to the Nissan worker.
Robots know no fatigue and work incessantly. We have to keep up with them, and our work rate has increased dramatically. Things are getting pretty bad.
To understand how the Japanese accept such a system, it is essential to understand the psychological pressures that underpin it. The Americans who trained with Nissan had come from a society that prizes the individual. But here in Japan, they would find that the emphasis is on the group. Americans who come to Japan are often impressed by this cohesiveness. But some Japanese are more ambivalent.
I visited a Chrysler plant in Detroit recently. What struck me was that the American workers are free to wear what they please and behave as they choose. They seem to work in an atmosphere of freedom. In Japan, all the workers wear uniforms. They work flat out every minute and every second. They seem strained. In America, by contrast, the workers seemed relaxed and untroubled. Under the Japanese management system, production takes place in groups. Japan's industrial growth was based on this. The individual and his opinions count for nothing. This is what Japanese group management is all about.
The Americans were to work inside this group system. Nissan hadn't brought them here just for technical training. Their foreman wanted this Japanese team spirit to rub off on them.
They're here working side by side with us. They're treated just like any other worker. I hope they get a feel for working as a team and not just as individuals. I hope they bring that spirit alive back in America.
That's good.
These small groups work in the same way as the buddy system. Workers feel loyal to their workmates. Obviously, they don't want to let them down. To avoid that, they'll put in extra effort. Some say Nissan uses this peer pressure to make its workers drive themselves ever harder.
You're part of a group, so you're made to feel you should do nothing that would cause trouble for the group. If you're injured on the job, you will not report it, because that would reflect badly on your coworkers, your group leader, and your foreman. So you do not file an accident report. You suffer in silence. Even if you're sick, you don't take the day off. You plug on through. You don't even take the vacations you're entitled to.
Every spring, the 70 members of the All Metal Workers Union print out a questionnaire and circulate it among several hundred fellow workers. It may be evidence that the grueling pace set by Nissan may be taking its toll, because the results of their survey suggest widespread discontent among ordinary Nissan workers.
The first question we asked is, how would you describe the quality of your life over the past year?
54% said that life had got harder in the past year.
The next question was, has work changed in the past year, and if so, how?
56% of the workers said their work was harder. Of these, 30% said their work was harder because the workload had increased. And 23% said it was because the workforce had been cut. These were the results.
Workers at Nissan assembly plants are supposed to be some of the most privileged in Japan. But most of the labor that goes into a Nissan truck or car is done at subsidiaries and subcontractors. There, working conditions are far more severe. This protest song is about a fight to improve conditions at a Nissan subsidiary called the Atsugi Motor Parts Company. The heroes of the song are known, inevitably, as the Atsugi Seven. The song celebrates the story of how they tried to buck the Nissan system. The Atsugi Seven say they found themselves up against the combined forces of Nissan and its union. First, they claim the company gave them bad jobs and lower pay. Then they say their own union harassed them and got them fired. They sued the company for discrimination and harassment, and Nissan paid them $100,000 in settlement. Now they're suing the company and the union to get their jobs back.
The union does nothing about the bad working conditions that my brother here described earlier. When it does anything at all, it sides with the company. It ignores the bad conditions so that the company can make more and more profits.
The local labor relations board, which officially investigates labor disputes, ruled that our activities were perfectly legal. As a result, the company and the union feared that support for us in the plant would spread if they didn't fire us. That was their biggest fear.
The Atsugi Seven point to one man as the central figure in a tight system of control. For 20 years, Ichiro Shioji has dominated his union. Shioji has defended the dismissal of the Atsugi workers, whom he describes as crypto-communists. Shioji himself has said it is the job of the union to cover for management and do the things they cannot do for themselves. In practice, critics say this includes the suppression of shop floor dissidents. And they further charge that Shioji's union is effectively a company police force. But Shioji believes that the welfare of his members depends on the prosperity of the company, and that anyone who rocks the boat is a threat to all. It is hardly surprising that dissent is so muted, and that the union gets virtually 100% support in all its elections.
I have this report. It shows how the eligible voters, the votes cast, and the votes in favor are all the same. There isn't one opposing vote. I think Americans and Europeans might find this difficult to believe. There can't really be unanimous support. In Japan, nothing less than total support will do. You can see that in this report.
In the last 30 years, only 2 men have run against the union's own nominees in union elections. Masao Kayama is one of them. He's not a union boss, nor is he a favored foreman. He's an ordinary worker who had been on night shift when we interviewed him in the tiny 2-room apartment that he shares with his wife and 2 children. At first, he says, the union tried to prevent his running for office. And when he did, only 5 dared vote for him. But it's not hard to understand why he sees every vote as a kind of moral victory.
When I ran for union office, we voted at 2 tables, each about 5 feet long. Behind them stood 5 or 6 union officers who were also company supervisors. Others stood behind us and beside us. Altogether, there were maybe 10 union officers around the table. They actually watched as each worker voted. When we vote on contracts, those who vote no or abstain are immediately accosted by a union official. They know right away who the opposition is. That's how we ratify contracts. It's outrageous.
According to Kayama, a worker who dares oppose the union will suffer sanctions at the hands of the company. And if he criticizes the company, he will face the wrath of the union.
If you oppose the union, as I have myself on any number of occasions, they tell other workers not to talk with you and not to sit with you during lunch breaks. They're basically told not to have anything to do with you at work. We're singled out like that. And they discriminate against you in various ways, on wages and other matters. We face constant harassment inside Nissan. The company discriminates against us on all counts. Our wages are about 10% less than workers of the same age and seniority.
I'm the same age as the group leader of the section next to mine. But he's been promoted, and I haven't. We are not even allowed to drink tea with the other workers. It's been like this for years.
During tea breaks, everyone else drinks tea together. I'm the only one who's excluded.
Harassment has taken extreme forms, it's claimed. And though there is no hard evidence of top union or management complicity, some dissidents allege that foremen and union officials even subject them to violence.
Large numbers of company supervisors and workers who had joined the Nissan union would surround one member of the all-metal workers union and hit him and harangue him. Many of our union members were injured.
The Atsugi 7 also charged that 5 of their members needed medical treatment after being mobbed by 200 employees of the Nissan subsidiary.
The company didn't like what we were doing, so they got together with the union and ganged up on us. They discriminated against us and threatened us with violence. They beat us up and kicked us. That's the kind of thing that they would do.
Though Nissan's president has made no public reply to such allegations, a spokesman for the company said a court is handling the Atsugi 7 case, and Nissan will abide by that verdict. Nissan would not confirm or deny the all-metal workers' story, saying it happened a long time ago and no record could be found of it. Nissan's spokesman suggested that the union was more closely involved in these affairs. But a spokesman for Mr. Shioji's union denied that the Atsugi 7 had suffered any violence from anyone, and said he was quite unaware of any incidents involving the all-metal workers. The union further denied using violence before, during, or after elections. This poster advertises a play staged recently in Tokyo. The play, which is based on a book by a Japanese investigative reporter, tells a true-life story. According to the book, scenes like this are no exaggeration. Workers in 6 Nissan factories and subsidiaries have filed complaints with the public prosecutor alleging incidents like this. Some have not been prosecuted for lack of evidence, and others are still pending. But in one case, a worker was convicted of assaulting one of the Atsugi 7. In another suit against 52 union members and supervisors, Nissan agreed out of court to pay damages. Clearly, such violence is an exception, but it raises larger questions about the whole nature of the group system. But this, the dark side of the Nissan story, never touched the lives of the workers from Tennessee. In their 6 weeks in Japan, they had only known the best of Nissan. That and the warmth and hospitality of their Japanese co-workers was what they would take home with them.
These people at Nissan, the product they put out represents them, personally speaking, not the company. They're not just, working for the company and go home. When they put out a unit, and if it's not exactly right, then they take it personally. It is theirs, and they have done wrong. And if we can adapt that and take it home, that's great.
That's one of the purposes of our trip.
This is the only job I've ever had that I didn't look forward to the weekend. Hey, my past job I had, I couldn't wait to see Saturday come where I could get off the job and relieve myself of that frustration, Hey, I look forward to working every day at Nissan.
They communicate. There's a word, nimawashi. It means people communicating and agreeing and working together and for a common goal. And that's what they do.
But really what concerned me most is, will this richness that they've never been exposed to, will it go to their head? Will it spoil them?
I don't think so. I don't think so. Different attitude.
But the Japanese people, this is a new way of life for them. I would just like to see how their productivity and quality and etc. will look 10 years from today. I'm wondering if they'll say, hey, shove it.
Nissan, one heck of a hunk of a truck.
On behalf of Nissan Motor Company, let me express my deepest appreciation.
At the press conference in Smyrna, President Ishihara deferred to Marvin Runyon whenever questions were raised about Nissan's anti-union stand in the United States.
We are, as I said before, very pro-employee. We want our employees to have a voice in what they do. An employee can walk in my office with a grievance if they have one, and they do. They can go to their supervisors, they can go to their plant managers, they can go to their vice president, or they can go to me. So we have many ways that people who have problems can resolve those problems.
Inevitably, the workers in Smyrna, Tennessee will want democracy at the workplace. They'll want representation of their own choosing, and you can't get that under the system that they have, which is really subservience to the boss. And American workers are too independent and too freedom-loving to abide that system for a long period of time.
In 10 years, the American factories are likely to be like Japanese factories. Feudalistic, paternalistic. That is the only way they will be able to reach Japanese levels of productivity. That's my greatest fear, that they will attempt to export the Japanese style of management to the United States.
Job one, in reality, was day one for a newly emerging American industry. Nissan Motor Manufacturing Corporation, USA.
They have yet to achieve full production in Smyrna. Only then will the workers' loyalty be fully tested. If good labor relations survive, it will be because Nissan USA took the best and avoided the worst from its Japanese parent.
An American company, managed by Americans, with American employees, building an American product.
Nissan.
As you can see, speaking out against a company like Nissan is very difficult under the Japanese system. So it's hard to know whether those workers who did talk to us represent a small, unhappy minority or the tip of an iceberg. Both Nissan and its union deny that any of the abuses these workers report took place, and certainly violent acts are the exception. But conforming to the group and showing loyalty to the company are clearly a way of life for Nissan's 50,000 employees. Back in Tennessee, the United Auto Workers have yet to launch a formal organizing drive in the Smyrna plant. But the UAW still believes that workers there will eventually want a union. Nissan intends that its Smyrna plant be 50% more productive than any other American auto factory. But company officials also realize that they must keep the workers happy enough to keep the union out. Next week on Frontline, an extraordinary program, a film which goes beyond political arguments to examine a complex decision. Next week, the experience of abortion.
With this vacuum cleaner type tube, the baby is literally pulled apart and ripped to pieces.
This is a personal story, the story of how a handful of people deal with the agonizing choice to have an unplanned baby or to come here to the abortion clinic. It is next week on Frontline. I'm Judy Woodruff.
For a transcript of this program, please send $4 to Frontline, Box 322, Boston, Massachusetts, 02134. Frontline is produced for the Documentary Consortium by WGBH Boston, which is solely responsible for its content. Major funding for Frontline was provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Additional funding was provided by this station and other public television stations nationwide.